Your father and I have been friendly rivals in business for some time now. Though Cross Limited is both bigger and older than Burley and Company. And now we brought us together, and perhaps we can look to a time when we're not competing, we work together for lower costs and higher prices.
Hear, hear, and I think my father agreed to that too.
Now, Arthur, I ought you not talk about business on an occasion like this.
Me either. All wrong.
No. I only mentioned it in passing. What I wanted to say was that Sheila's a lucky girl, and Gerald, I think you're quite a fortunate young man too.
I know I am, this once anyhow.
So, here's to a life of prosperity to Sheila and Gerald. The theme is males, and we picked a scene right at the start on page 4, and in the setting where they're all together celebrating Sheila's marriage, we have Burling with this long interjection and this sort of monologue speech. He talks about business and sort of a character of himself, and that's going to be shown throughout the play, and so that's good for building on what's going to be there later. Shows that he's business-minded, and not only is it Burling, but it's also Gerald, really just together talking to each other, really excluding the rest of the family, and so that shows the males and the dominance sort of as well.
And then like how so we can relate this back to in the society then, like how business used to only be like powered by men, like and normally in this play business is symbolizing the idea of like male dominance, and so basically, and it's very interesting to see like they're celebrating the marriage between Sheila and Gerald, but Burling in this case he just manages to shift the idea from marriage to like business making, and
and what's important as well is that you have a conflict between Miss Burling. She disagrees with the rest of the family, basically Burling and Gerald, and that's going to show the conflict later on, and it also encapsulates Sheila's identity when she says neither do I, oh wrong. It's just a small comment, but she really disagrees, and she doesn't just objects to how this sort of business like minded conversation is going on.
How could I know what would happen afterwards? If she'd been some miserable, plain little creature, I don't suppose I'd have done it, but she was very pretty and looked as if she could take care of herself.
In fact, in a kind of way, you could have been said to have been jealous of her.
Yes, I suppose so.
So, as a daughter of a good customer and a man well known in the town, you used your power to punish a girl just because she made you feel like that?
Yes, but it didn't seem to be anything very terrible at the time. Don't you understand? And if I could help her now, I would.
Yes, but you can't. It's too late. She's dead. The theme power, so we chose Sheila's monologue from page 24, where we discover her role in Eva Smith's suicide. So Sheila basically exposes the upper class and how they misuse their power to essentially end lives as she's dead. Also, they believe they have the right to punish her just because she looked prettier in a dress, which shows her childlike attitude.
This extract is key for showing how much Sheila has changed throughout the play. So in this point of the play, Sheila was very shallow, and we know this because she associated being capable of taking care of yourself with beauty. So she thought that because Eva Smith was beautiful or pretty, she could take care of herself. So it shows how shallow Sheila was before. And then another point that shows how much she's changed is when the fact that she uses the word impertinent in this extract, or in her monologue, because later on in the play she mocks her mother for using the same word. So this is key because it shows us that before, earlier in the play, she was using the same words that her mother would use, and she was not mocking her mother for using not mocking her for using these words. However, later on she mocks her mom for using the same words that she used, which shows how much she's changed, and even things that she said before she disagrees with, and she mocks her mother for saying them. So
Nothing but morbid curiosity.
No, it isn't.
Please don't contradict me like that.
Mother, don't. Please don't. For your own sake as well as ours.
You mustn't.
Mustn't what? Really, Sheila?
You mustn't try to build up a wall between us and that girl. If you do, the inspector's just going to break it down and it'll be all the worse when he does.
I don't understand you. Do you?
Yes, and she's right.
I beg your pardon?
I said yes. I do understand her, and she's right.
That I consider is a trifle impertinent, Inspector. What is it now, Sheila?
I don't know. Perhaps it's because impertinent is such a silly word.
In any case...
But Mother, do stop before it's too late.
If you mean that Inspector will take offence...
No, I never take offence.
I'm glad to hear it. Though it does seem that we're more likely to be taking offence.
Let's leave offence out of it, shall we?
I think we'd better.
So do I.
I'm talking to the Inspector now, if you don't mind. You do know that my husband was Lord Mayor for 2 years, and he's still a magistrate.
So on page 30, as a theme, we're seeing social hierarchy. So one of Sheila's lines is, you mustn't try to build a kind of wall between us and that girl. We see that social hierarchy is very evident in the family and in the upper class. They believe, themselves are higher. However, we can also see that Sheila has changed within the first act, and with her exposure to the inspector, that she's changed her views to oppose the social hierarchy.
And this is used by Priestley to show that people can overcome the barriers and divisions created in the social hierarchy by using Sheila, by using the young generation by using the younger generation to... I lost my flow. I don't know.
Keep going, it's fine, just keep going.
And Sheila's short hysterical laugh could be like representing that although she is younger, she's kind of mocking her own mother, and she's making fun of the choice of vocab that her mother's chosen. So, for example, the word impertinent is really funny for Sheila, and it shows that she knows what she's saying, and she knows that she's right, and that Ms. Burling just doesn't know what's going on at all.
And
Yeah.
and earlier on, as Asap said, Sheila did mention about a wall, and later on in Miss Burling's speech, we see her name drop, her husband's position as a magistrate, and we see Mrs. Burling use her position, her power, her husband's power, as a defense mechanism against her ruthless actions, her wrongdoings, her ruthless actions
to kind of
against
justify
the poor, to justify her actions that are clearly wrong. And Priestley's juxtaposition of Sheila's and
he kind of rejects the notion that you can just because you're a higher class, just because you have more power, just because you have more money, that doesn't mean that you can just like use that to just build up walls and in front of from lower class people. And
we also see that the family hierarchy has been broken down a little bit. Sheila interjects her mother. She has a similar amount of lines as well, suggesting that her importance has grown within the family compared to when they first started out in the play. Priestley's suggesting that it's not just a social hierarchy that you have to transcend. That it's also there's a hierarchy within the family that affects the way that people think, and the young generation are very key to that.
And Sheila is growing power in the family, as you did say. It shows that the young do have the power to actually make a change in the world. That's Priestley's whole point of Sheila embodying the inspector through the way she interrupts, through her use of language, through her use of questions and questioning her own family. That just shows that the young does have the power to change the world.
It's alright talking like that now, but he made us confess.
He certainly didn't make me confess, as you call me. I quite plainly told him that I thought I'd done nothing more than my duty.
Oh, Mother.
The fact is, you allowed yourself to be bluffed. Yes, bluffed.
Oh, really, Arthur?
No, not you, my dear. But these two. That fellow obviously didn't like us. He was prejudiced from the start. Probably a socialist or some crank. He talked like that. And then instead of standing up to him, you let him bluff you into talking about your private affairs. You ought to have stood up to him.
Well, I didn't notice you standing up to him.
No, but by the time you'd admitted you'd been taking money, what chance had I after that? I was a fool not to have insisted upon seeing him alone.
That wouldn't have worked.
Of course it wouldn't.
Really, from the way you children talk, you might be wanting to help him instead of us. Now be quiet so your father can decide what we ought to do.
Yes, well, we'll have to do something, and get to work quickly too. That's it.
So this is on page 60, and it's about the younger generation and their ideological gap between the older generation and them. Yeah.
We chose it
Go.
because...
In this passage, we can see that Eric and Sheila are working together. So that's also one of the reasons why we chose it, because the younger duo are working against the older generation. And
at this point in the play, we see that the family did learn something, but they all learned in very different ways. Sheila and Eric, clearly from this passage, we can see that they've learned about their moral complications and their moral dilemmas, and they understand what they did wrong to the society. They understand about the collective responsibility they had in the fictionalized death of Eva Smith. But from Mr. Burling and Mrs. Burling, we see Mrs. Burling in denial. She's denying the fact that she had any part in it. She is behaving like a child. And then
the point where she says he certainly didn't make me confess, which is referring to the inspector, it shows like that Miss Burling is just so blind that she still doesn't understand that she actually has,
and she doesn't want to,
revealed quite a lot.
We see
hanged Eric, and she's still arguing against Sheila's views on moral views, and even though hers are wrong.
And we see the irony here that Sheila and Eric, they're the supposed younger generation. We see the older generation constantly infantilizing them, patronizing them, telling them that, oh, you don't know anything, you're children, let the adults handle this. But it's quite ironic because the older generation are clearly being more immature than him, immature than the younger generation in this scenario, because a younger generation in this scenario.
And from the way that, like Angela said, they're being infantilized, it shows that even though the younger generation, they are part of the family, they still want to help the inspector instead of the older generation, even though they're their parents, just because the inspector's moral views are actually correct.
Yeah, we see Mrs. Burling passing on the blame, like how little kids act. They're like, oh yeah, I didn't do this. Like, they are so adamant that they had no part in Eva Smith's death that the audience almost laughs at them, takes pity on them, because they clearly don't understand, and they don't want to understand.
And this scene expresses Priestley's view on the generation gap, that there's still hope for the younger generation, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But just remember this. There are millions and millions and millions of Eva Smiths and John Smiths still left in this world, with their lives intertwined with ours. Their lives, their hopes, their fears, their suffering, their chances of happiness, and it's all intertwined with ours and what we think and say and do. We do not live alone. We're members of one body. And the time will soon come where, if men will not learn that lesson, then they'll be taught in blood and fire and anguish. Good night.
I'm going to be talking about responsibility on page 56. So, in this speech, Priestley's socialist values and ideals are summed up, with this moment really showcasing his use of the inspector as his mouthpiece. We don't live alone. Again, reiterating Priestley's focus on the community rather than the individual, and delivering a damning condemnation of society's capitalist scruples or lack of, delivered at the end of the play at a moment of tension to compound the impact on the audience. The quote, millions of Eva Smiths and John Smiths, highlighting the deteriorating conditions of the working class, and you can really see the effect of Priestley's use of characters as caricatures here. Eva Smith can clearly be seen to be representing the working class, and again highlighted by the sheer numbers mentioned. The other quote, fire, blood and anguish. This literally could be interpreted as Priestley foreshadowing World War I, while the inspector can be seen as taking on a more demonic role with references to religion, a change from his previous angelic-like role.
this is the point. I don't want to lecture you two young fellows again, but what so many of you don't seem to understand, now, when things are so much easier, is that a man has to make his own way, has to look after himself, and his family too, of course, when he has one. And so long as he does that, he won't come to much harm. But the way some of these cranks talk and write now, you think everybody has to look after everybody else, as if we were all mixed up together, like bees in a hive, community, and all that nonsense. But take my word for it, you youngsters, and I've learned in the good hard school of experience, it's a man has to mind his own business, has to look after himself and his own, and...
I'll be speaking about Burling's speech on page 9, which highlights the theme of older generation. So we can see from the very beginning that Priestley characterizes the older generation as overbearing capitalists who are patronizing and unwilling to change. So Burling's speech before the inspector's entrance illustrates the role he plays as acting as a foil for the younger generation, which illustrates the socialist point of view on how the younger generation is more progressive and willing to change. And when we compare Burling's speech to his speeches later on in the play, we can see that he's still adamant about change and he's still concerned about there will be a public scandal. And compared to Sheila's dynamic change of understanding, we can really see how the younger generation compares to the older generation. And the older generation is set in their ways and sees the younger generation as foolish.
I want you to understand that I didn't install her there so I could make love to her. I made her go to Morgan Terrace because, well, I was sorry for her and didn't like the thought of her going back to the Palace Bar. I didn't ask for anything in return.
I see.
Yes, but why are you saying that to him? You ought to be saying it to me.
I suppose I should. I'm sorry, Sheila.
I know. Somehow he makes you.
But she became your mistress?
Yes. I suppose it was inevitable, really. She was young and pretty and warm-hearted and intensely grateful. I became at once the most important person in her life. You understand?
Yes. She was a woman, she was lonely, we're in love with her.
Just what I was about to ask.
I really must protest.
Why should you do any protesting? It was you who turned the girl out in the first place.
Well, I only did what any employer might have done. And what I was going to say was that I protest against the way in which my daughter, a young unmarried girl, is being dragged into this.
Your daughter isn't living on the moon. She's here in Brumley too.
The role of female characters in Inspector Calls is incredibly important. One of the principal characters is, after all, a female. This interchange between Gerald and the Inspector can teach the audience a lot of things.
At first, we see Gerald's condescending tone towards Eva Smith. He treats her like a plaything, yet doesn't even realize it. The audience can clearly see this from a contemporary point of view. The audience can also pick up on Burling's condescending tone towards Sheila when he tries to cut her off or stifle her, and it is the inspector who emancipates her. Mrs. Burling's lack of speech in this extract and throughout the play portrays the uninvolvement of the contemporary women to an extent. However, an alternative reading could convey how sure Mrs. Burling is of herself, as she is of a higher class than Mr. Burling, and doesn't feel the need to be involved in this celebration.
You're offering the money at the wrong time, Mr. Burling. No, I don't think any of you will forget. Nor that young man, Croft, though he at least had some affection for her and made her happy for a time. Well, Eva Smith's gone now. You can't do her any more harm, and you can't do her any more good either. You can't even say, "I'm sorry, Eva Smith."
That's the worst of it.
But just remember this. One Eva Smith is gone, but there are millions and millions and millions of Eva Smiths and John Smiths still with us. With their lives, their hopes and dreams, their suffering and their chance of happiness all intertwined with our lives, and what we think and say and do. We do not live alone. We are members of one body. We are responsible for one another. And I tell you that the time will soon come when, if men cannot learn this lesson, and they will be taught it, in fire and blood and anguish. Good night.
The theme of morality is a constant undercurrent in the play and tends to play off other themes such as social class and love, as shown in the inspector's final monologue. In the passage, the inspector summarizes all the questions of morality that have been raised to the Burlings, talking about the millions of Eva Smiths, and that if the Burlings' morals, and the upper class in general, don't change, they will be in the same situation repeatedly. The inspector's views on morality are complemented by his views on responsibility. When he says we are all members of one body, he sounds like he is preaching his own morals to them, as he knows that they have lived in their world for too long to know how to change themselves. Sheila and Eric seem to be the only ones who have refined their morals by the play's ending, highlighting the recurring theme of the young versus the old. Overall, morality plays off other themes.